I bought this Skyline from a shop that gave up on building it. And then I bought this Skyline that had been stolen from its previous owner and then recovered. In October last year, we picked up this Skyline that was left to rot, and in the state it was in, most would consider it not fixable. We bought this car not knowing if the engine would even run, but we got super lucky and we managed to start it for the very first time. After that, we sent it off to a body shop to get painted, and now it looks like this. It looked incredible, and after we got it back, we installed a bunch of parts that we sourced from Japan because this Skyline basically came with no interior, and last week I got my friends over at Autoglass to come around and install the rest of the glass, and at this point, I'd say that the car is about 90% complete. Now, while I was waiting for that Skyline to be painted, this Skyline came up for very cheap on Facebook Marketplace. And because it was so cheap, I decided to buy it, and it turned out that this Skyline had a history and it actually had been stolen at one point in its previous life and recovered. Now, we didn't get as lucky as we got with the other Skyline with the motor, because when we tried to start it for the very first time, we just couldn't get it to run right. I think this engine's done. So unfortunately, we had to pull the motor and we found the worst possible outcome. Oh my god, what the hell? Bro, that's a freaking con rod coming out of the block. The engine was blown up and we found a connecting rod outside of the engine block. Now, as much as I'd like to keep both of these Skylines, it's just not viable for me, and having one perfect Skyline just makes more sense. The barn find Skyline has never been registered in Australia before, which means it needs to go through a number of hurdles in order to get it on the road. And we'll talk about that later in the video in detail. Anyway, we got super lucky with the barn find Skyline, as you guys spotted that it had an RB25 turbo gearbox on it. So I'm going to remove it from the barn find Skyline and swap in the other gearbox that we have from the blown motor RB20. We're now going to put the RB25 gearbox that's in this car on the engine that's going to go in this car. It's going to be a bit of a tedious process because we do have to then install the RB20 gearbox in this thing. So basically we're just doing a gearbox swap so that we can get this thing running and driving with a very strong gearbox that we can abuse. To remove the gearbox, I started by putting the car on jack stands. One day I hope to get a shop so I don't have to do this stuff on the floor. Now again, thanks to you guys for spotting this, but as you can see, this is an RB25 turbo gearbox that someone has swapped into this thing. Anyway, I started off by removing the tail shaft, which connects to the differential with 4 bolts and nuts. Oh my. And then I removed the center bearing bracket, which is as easy as 1 bolt and 1 nut holding it to the chassis. Ah! Okay, we're just comparing shaft size now between the 25 gearbox and the 20 gearbox. Which shaft would you prefer, fam?
I like bigger shafts more.
Yeah, I like big shafts too, man, so I can't put that in, bro. Next, I removed the slave cylinder, which was 2 14mm bolts, and then I removed the starter, which in most cases is very tricky, but we managed by firstly removing the terminals, and then the 2 bolts holding it to the gearbox, and then the starter came out. That wasn't actually too hard. Starter out. Next, we remove the gearbox. Oh, shit. I then drained the gearbox, removed the mount holding the gearbox to the chassis, and then I disconnected the 2 plugs going to the gearbox from the main harness, which is most likely used for the reverse lights and the speedo. Lachlan then went inside the car and removed the shifter so that we wouldn't destroy it when removing the gearbox, and we were basically ready to disconnect the bolts holding the gearbox to the engine. This required a lot of extensions to get to the top bolts. We used the hole in the chassis to get access to the back of the bolts on the transmission, along with all these extensions, and now it was time to remove the gearbox. Before we take out the gearbox, I just wanted to interrupt today's video with our new merch drop, Forgotten Cars Timeless Stories t-shirts representing the R32, and on the front we have Preserving the Past. There's a few little Easter eggs on the design here. There's like a little turbo there. You know, we're creating some timeless stories with these cars, and I wanted to create a t-shirt that sort of represents that, and these are now live on the benkyspec.com website. Anyway, let's get to taking out the gearbox on this Skyline. Removing the gearbox on the floor is always a struggle, but we always manage to pull it off, and luckily I had my friend Lachlan helping me. This is definitely not a one-man job. Now that is a big gearbox. Look at that, bro. That is huge.
Bro, no way. Is that an RB25 gearbox? in a GTST? Wow. That's it.
So we actually got super lucky with this RB25 gearbox because they are worth quite a bit of money. So this car I bought for a total of 7 grand, and just the gearbox swap alone is worth like 3.5, 4 grand. So anyway, we are now gonna start chucking the RB20 gearbox in the painted Skyline so we can get it rolling and then start figuring stuff out. As you can see, the RB25 gearbox is much larger than the RB20 gearbox. I guess Nissan revised the gearboxes because the 2.5 litre made much more power. And not only did we get lucky with the gearbox, we also got lucky with the clutch. As you can see from the outside on the pressure plate, it looks pretty new. And after taking everything apart, removing the pressure plate and the clutch, look at the flywheel. It's literally been freshly machined. It's almost as if this gearbox was freshly installed on this car, but this literally has a freshly swapped R33 RB25 gearbox installed on it and clutch. Safe to say, we have basically a brand new clutch for this thing, which is so sick. So because we're swapping everything over and using the RB20 gearbox, we're going to use the old clutch that came out of the RB20 gearbox as well. So I'm going to install the old flywheel, then I'm going to install the old clutch, and then my friend Lucas helped me out install the gearbox, which was a massive pain in the ass because they just didn't want to go in place. The input shaft just did not want to squeeze into the clutch, but we managed in the end with a lot of force, and when it clunked in, it was so satisfying. Anyway, Nathan came over, he helped me fill up the gearbox with gear oil, and then I installed the shifter as well, and that was basically it. The RB20 gearbox was in the car. Okay, we have now finally installed the gearbox. Everything has been bled and we are ready to test everything. So we actually had to change the slave cylinders. You can see right here there is one bolt on top of each other for the RB20 gearbox, whereas the RB25 gearbox, the bolt holes are a bit different, just like so, one bolt on each side. And I guess that's how you guys would have spotted that this was an RB25 gearbox. Wheels are installed. We're now gonna just test the car and see if it can row through the gears. So we're just gonna make sure that the wheels turn. All right, let's test it, see if the wheels move. All right, good sign. All right, first gear, here we go. They're moving?
Yeah.
All right, second gear. Going faster?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah! All right, RB20 gearbox conversion successful. Now let's get to the other Skyline. So guys, here is the problem. This is the barn find R32 Skyline, and unfortunately, we're going to be getting rid of it. We're going to be selling it. The plan was to keep this car, and the plan wasn't ever to buy this R32 Skyline, the stolen R32 Skyline. While this Skyline was getting painted, the other Skyline, the stolen Skyline, came up for too good of a price, and I had to buy it. And because we have two Skylines, it only makes sense for me to keep the one in better condition. Yes, the barn find Skyline has been painted, but the stolen R32 Skyline is just in better shape overall compared to what this one was like when we first got it. And this Skyline has been registered in Australia before, whereas this one hasn't, and it needs to go through a number of different inspections such as compliance to get it on the road, and that's going to cost a lot of money and time. These YouTube videos and builds aren't cheap. I have to do things on a budget, and my budget doesn't include me owning two R32 Skylines. I'd love to turn one into a track car and one into a street driven car, but because the other one is going to be way easier to get on the road, I'm going to be keeping the stolen Skyline and getting rid of the one that we just basically finished, the barn find Skyline. I know that some of you are going to be thinking that I just gave up on the barn find R32 Skyline, but it's deeper than that. I need to do what makes more financial sense. It makes more sense to fix this car and finish this thing off because I don't need to go through compliance. All I need is a roadworthy check. It took a lot of time to make this decision. I'd love to keep this thing, but I can't. But anyway, we're going to finish off installing the gearbox and motor in this thing and hopefully get it driving or at least cranking in today's video. Because the hot side was completely bare, I decided to refresh it with some new hardware. After perusing the web, I managed to find these OEM manifold studs, and to install them I had to remove the old ones. You start by screwing on one nut to the stud, and then another nut, and then you force the two together and then you're able to unbolt the stud. I had to do this to all of them and it was quite a tedious process, but then we were able to install a manifold with fresh hardware and then fit up the max pitting rods turbo. So guys, this is the RB20 engine that we're going to be putting in the stolen R32 Skyline. And it also didn't come with a hot side as well. That's no problem at all. It is no problem, of course, because Max Heating Rods have supplied us with a turbo. I get messages all the time. Is Max Heating Rods actually that good? Are you just promoting a bad brand? No, that is not the case. Max Heating Rods turbos are actually really good, especially for the price point. You know the drill, guys. Got the foam, and we have, the Max Heating Rods spoolie boy. Look at that, don't even need to buy gaskets because they supply them. Okay, so the Max Heating Rods turbo is on the motor now, and it looks like we just need to rotate the housing. So as you can see with this on right now, that is the oil feed right there, and it needs to be straight up in the air, so literally directly up. We're just gonna loosen these bolts right here, and then we'll be able to rotate the front housing and the rear housing, and then rotate the core so that it is directly in the middle. Okay, I managed to do it, and as you can see, the center is pointing directly up. Everything's sort of freely moving right now. Now the turbo is going on for good. There we go. I then fitted up all the lines going to the turbo, and because this turbo doesn't come with a drain fitting, I needed to remove it off the old turbo, which was as simple as two 12mm bolts. Unfortunately, because this is an all-wheel drive block, we needed to cut the turbo drain as the drain is in a different location. And this sucked because it was an OEM part, but that's okay because it all worked out. I bought this cheap kit on some random website, and I'm not really too confident with this silicone hose, but that's okay. Raceworks is here to save the day, and we're going to be using their heat sleeve, so just like so. Oh, you probably cut too much. Oh, I didn't chop it enough to Yeah,
you didn't chop that before.
Yeah, I know. I'm rushing everything, but yeah, we're going to use this to protect this just in case this is not reliable. While I sorted out the oil drain, Nathan tackled the thermostat housing and the thermostat. Because this is an old engine, there was quite a bit of rust, and the thermostat housing was hard to remove, and it was the same as the thermostat. The old thermostat was basically rusted in place, so we had to use a screwdriver to pry it out, and here's a comparison of the old thermostat and the brand new Nissan thermostat. Alright, it's been a few hours, and it is now dark, and we still have Nathan here.
I'm being held at gunpoint.
That's right, man. You're not leaving tonight. So we've basically installed everything that we need to install before the RB20 goes into the car. But now we do need to take it off the engine stand because we are going to be installing this gearbox. But before we install this gearbox, we have a special surprise for it.
Cube speed.
Cube Speed. Richard from Cube Speed has been in contact with me over the past few months actually, and he has supplied us with, of course, the best short shifters on the market today, Cube Speed shifters. A lot of people run these, and yeah, we're going to be chucking one in the R33 gearbox.
Like that?
Yeah, man. The Cube Speed shifters are used all around the world and are some of the best shifters on the market today. A lot of my friends use Cube Speed shifters in their cars, and I'm really excited to have one in the R32 Skyline. Dude, stop, you're gonna eat them. There was a bunch of parts that came in these boxes, and it might seem intimidating at first, but have no fear, there is instructions included, and there is also YouTube videos explaining how to install every single Cube Speed shifter. Yes!
Beautiful.
So we're getting rid of that as well.
Video instructions, baby! If you want to install one of these shifters, you can look at those videos, but I'll just basically sum up at the end how difficult it is to install, and we are going to have to disassemble everything after because we're going to have to put the engine and gearbox in the car as one. So let's get to it, shall we? There are a lot of parts that come with the shifter, and there is no way that you can install these shifters without instructions. Luckily though, the instructions are very clear, and I was able to follow the video and install everything. On a scale of 1 to 10 on the difficulty of installing this Cube Speed shifter, I'll give that about a 7.5 out of 10. What do you reckon?
It was actually easier than I thought because the stock shifter has like circlips to hold it in. 7 out of 10.
Interesting. Alright. Oh my god. Bam! Bam, bam, clutch kick. We're not really going to get a feel for this thing until we drive the car for the first time, but just want to say huge thank you to, of course, Richard from Cube Speed Racing. This is going to be an awesome addition to the Skyline build. Hell yeah! Anyway, it was time to take the engine off the engine stand, so I used these bolt holes in the engine head to attach a chain on. Then I set up my engine crane, took it off the engine stand, and it was time to start installing the gearbox. Now for some reason the engine was missing a dowel, but I managed to source one online, so we quickly hammered that in, and then I removed the rear main seal, which was a pain in the ass. And how you do that is you use a self-tapping screw to screw into the rear main, and then you pry it out with a pry bar. After that, I put on the dust shield, and then I installed the flywheel, and in order to torque the flywheel, I got Nathan to hold the crank on the other side of the engine, and then we installed the clutch using this makeshift clutch alignment tool that I customized myself. We got the gearbox on the RB20 now. Man, that took hours. Nathan, do you want to explain why?
This is one of the hardest gearboxes ever to install. It's got like 3 million splines on the input shaft, so it's really hard to mesh it with the splines on the flywheel, which is why I paid someone to put in my car.
But you know, we don't do that here. DIY everything. Yes, at the cost of my mental and physical strength. Goddamn. There you go. What a nightmare, man. The next day, Nathan changed the oil filter with this brand new Ryco oil filter on the RB20, and then we replaced the fuel filter in the chassis, and here's the comparison of the old versus new. I also installed some brand new engine mounts, and the engine was finally ready to go into the R32. So we need to line these little studs on the engine mounts to these notches on the subframe just there. So that's what we're working with. I'll let you know how we go. There are a few tricks installing these engines into these cars. What you have to do is jack up the rear of the car and then slightly jack up the front so then you can put the engine crane underneath the chassis. And as you can see here, once we sort of slot the engine in, you do need a jack to lift up the gearbox so that you can put the engine the rest of the way through. And just like that, we have the RB20 in the Nissan R32 Skyline. Look at that. So happy that this thing has finally got, hopefully, a running engine. Now, I just wanted to quickly shout out Chicane Tools from, of course, Autobahn, because this toolkit right here has been such a joy to use right alongside the motor. Like, it's so simple having all your tools right next to you when you're working on, let's just say, your engine or your car. Yeah, super easy to access all your tools, and we got basically everything. Autobahn has been helping out the channel for a few years now, and of course they sell chicane tools, so if you want to grab stuff from Autobahn, make sure you check out their chicane tool section, and also grab some cleaning products or, you know, whatever you need from there, because they sell basically everything. Anyway, we're going to put the rest of this RB20 together and hopefully crank it for the very first time, and hopefully it doesn't sound anything like the old RB20 that had a rod thrown out the side of the block. Makes sense why it made that sound.
Hopefully the compression stays in the engine rather than out the side. That would be fantastic, lovely, beautiful.
We got straight to work plugging up everything on the new RB20. I started by connecting up all the electrical plugs and then the throttle cable, and on this motor it didn't have the bracket to hold the throttle cable on, so I removed it off the old intake and then reinstalled it onto the new RB20 intake. I then connected up the power steering lines with these two bolts, and while I was doing all this, Nathan flushed out the radiator because the radiator had a milky fluid in it because of the oil and the coolant mixing in the old engine. I then connected up all the electrical plugs going to the motor on the top, and then I went ahead and removed all the old spark plugs and replaced them with brand new NGK BKR 6Es. Now, because we had to crank this motor, it was time to fill it up with oil and make sure there was no oil leaks. And I think this motor takes about 5 liters of oil, but because it was completely dry, it almost took all 6 liters we had in this bottle. Alright, we are basically ready to crank the engine. Like I said, I hope it doesn't make the same sound that the old motor made. Anyway, let's see what happens. Everything should be connected. I just noticed this. We don't have the grounds connected on the harness. Have a look at that. So that's probably...
I said that and you're like, nah.
Nah, but I thought it was talking about the main ground, man. You know. Alright, let's see. Still nothing, man. Oh, still nothing. Let's have a look. Okay, we spotted one more plug that's not connected. Look at that. I think that probably has something to do with it. Oh, there we go. Okay, we got power now. Oh yeah!
Sounds like it's got comp.
Alright, this time we definitely have compression. That's a healthy sounding RB20, boys. Hell yeah! Woo! Wow, dude, I can't believe it though. It's pretty sick.
That's the best sounding RB yet.
Yeah, that is definitely the best sounding RB20 yet.
Maybe just some all-wheel drive block.
Yes, it's a special RB20. Thanks for your help, bros. So it's looking promising for the RB20 that we've just put in this car. It sounds pretty healthy, but we won't find out until it's healthy until we start it. You definitely can't conclude if a motor's okay just by turning the starter. You need to actually start it. So the only things that we need to do before starting this thing is get the fuel installed, the radiator, the intercooler, and it should be started. But we don't have time in today's video, so we're gonna leave it at that. But hopefully in the next video, we see this thing driving for the very first time. Leave your comments below if you have any questions about this R32 Skyline. If you saw that part of the video, thank you, and let me know what you think. But that about sums up today's video on the stolen R32 Skyline. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. See ya.
It's true, I just can't deny. It's time for me to straighten things out. Yeah.
Last night I slept here in the hole of the old engine block.
Bro, no way. Is that an RB25 gearbox?